day 3 of the Republican National Convention here in Cleveland, Ohio, and Texas Senator Ted Cruz will take center stage tonight. But before that, he held one last rally with supporters to thank them. We'll take you there. Plus, a federal appeals court says Texas's voter ID law is discriminatory. We'll have the latest on what it means for the election this fall. And Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick joins us live from the RNC. His thoughts on this latest decision by the Fifth Circuit, plus his role at the convention and what he expects from Cruz's speech. Capitol Tonight, live from Cleveland, starts right now. Thanks for joining us here on Capitol Tonight, live from Cleveland, Ohio. We are in day 3 of the Republican National Convention. We'll get to more of your convention news in just a moment. But first, some big news out of Texas today. It's being called a victory for voting rights in Texas. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals has ruled that the state's controversial voter ID law violates the Voting Rights Act. The lower court is now being tasked with making some changes to the law, and that's ahead of the November election. Our Leanne Wallace has been following this for us from Austin today. She joins us now from the studio. Leanne, what can we expect with some of these changes?
Karina, the Fifth Circuit is asking the lower court to make some changes that disrupt this year's election as little as possible. Those who have been fighting this law are celebrating today, but say their fight might not be over.
Today's a big win for Texas voters.
The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled Wednesday that the state's voter ID law has a discriminatory effect.
What we'll be seeing is that voter ID as we know it in Texas, the strictest voter ID law in the country, will be no more.
The New Orleans-based federal appeals court is now asking a lower court to make changes to the law ahead of the November elections.
We have the most important election of our lifetime coming up.
The law, which passed in 2011 and took effect in 2013, made it so voters would have to show a photo ID at the polls ahead of casting their ballots.
There's a big misconception that people have to have an ID for everything, and yes, they do. But in this particular instance, when you disenfranchise people, it is a crime. It should be a crime.
Governor Greg Abbott fought challenges to this law as Attorney General, and as governor maintains it's necessary, saying, quote, "The Fifth Circuit rightly reversed the lower court's findings of a discriminatory purpose, but wrongly concluded the law had a discriminatory effect. Voter fraud is real, and it undermines the integrity of the election process."
This particular ruling has spoken loud and clear.
Those who oppose the law are prepared for the state's top leaders to challenge the federal court's ruling. But in the meantime,
Texas Democrats know that our democracy and our nation are stronger when everyone participates.
They're hopeful this means a bigger turnout in Texas this November.
Voter ID was holding people back from exercising their right to vote, and we'll now move forward with a fairer system.
In a state that has an historically low voter turnout. Well, Governor Abbott indicated the fight over voter ID will continue. He also said in a statement today that Texas will continue to make sure there is no illegal voting at the ballot box. Karina?
Leanne, thank you very much for that report. We appreciate your news there from Austin. Texas Senator Ted Cruz will take center stage tonight, but before he does that, he took some time to thank supporters here at an event in Cleveland. Capitol Tonight's David Cotton is live from the convention floor now. And David, what was his message to some of those supporters today?
Well, you know, Karina, they wish they were uniting behind him as the nominee this week. Now they're wondering whether or not he'll back the one who is. You'll remember during the primary season, their relationship was fairly cordial to begin with and then turned sour at the end. Delegates I spoke with today told me they hope he makes some news. Crowds gathered on the deck of a Cleveland restaurant Wednesday for one last Ted Cruz rally. With his 2016 presidential ambitions officially over.
You know, this afternoon is really for one very simple purpose, and it is to say thank you to each and every one of you. Thank you from the very, very bottom of our hearts.
Cruz touted the success he had on his campaign and never mentioned the elephant in the room by name. Cruz ended his presidential run with just 475 delegates, but his supporters are still reeling from the loss.
It was like a punch in the gut.
Sue Cleveland, a Texan, fought hard for the Cruz crew.
You know, people are saying, get over it, and get over it, and get on with it. And, well, it takes a little while to heal from something and to go from one to the other.
She says she's coming around to Donald Trump to keep another Clinton away from Washington. There are those, however, in Texas who've supported the New York billionaire since day one.
I liked his strength. I liked his sense of purpose.
Mary Gilson of Schertz, Texas, says it's not that she doesn't like Ted Cruz. She's just tired of politics as usual.
He was saying what we people on the outside have been saying for years. They just weren't listening.
Like a lot of delegates, Gilson wants to see all of Trump's Republican rivals eventually back his nomination.
Trump seemed to me to be the one.
For her, it's about the greater good and less about swallowing their pride. Ted Cruz's role in Cleveland wasn't how he envisioned it. But if his supporters have any say at the next convention, he'll be the main attraction. Senator Cruz told us earlier today one of his only regrets during the campaign came after that Indiana primary loss. He said he wanted to personally thank all of his supporters, but he feared he'd get a little too emotional. Now, Karina, he said he didn't want to go from being called Lion Ted to Crying Ted.
Yeah, Cruz was pretty on today in some of those comebacks. Another well-timed moment, or maybe not so well-timed moment. Cruz was saying who the nominee is to that crowd, and lots of loud boos. And right as that was happening, Donald Trump's plane flew over. Here was Cruz's reaction to that.
All right. That was pretty well orchestrated. Jeff, did you email them to fly the plane right when I said that?
And it appears Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick will not be able to join us tonight, but coming up after the break, Republican analyst Ted DeLisi will be here. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Capitol Tonight, live from the Republican National Convention here in Cleveland, Ohio. I told you just a little bit ago that we didn't think we were going to get Lieutenant Governor on the show, but you made it. I know that it's a tough process to get up here.
It takes a while to get everywhere.
It does. Well, we appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on the show. And first off, some big news out of Texas today. I just wanted to get your take on the voter ID ruling.
We're back in the fight. The fight never ends. It's one of the reasons why this election is so important to our Supreme Court, because all battles eventually get to the Supreme Court, and we don't want Hillary Clinton, as Republicans, as conservative Texans, we don't want her appointing a liberal court that will basically undermine everything any Republican state does, because if you have 5 or 6 liberal judges, we can pass the best legislation in the world. It's not just conservative, but good for people. Photo voter ID is a really good idea to protect the ballot box. And Donald Trump will appoint conservative judges. She will appoint liberals. Case closed. That's a reason to vote for Trump.
How do you think it will affect this election this November with some of the changes that are being asked now?
You know, this election is going to come down, regardless of what the issue is, to just people who don't want 8 more years of Obama, who want a change agent, whether it's they're unemployed or they have stagnant wages, whether they're worried about the border being secured or whether they're worried about ISIS, whether they're worried about a Supreme Court that will undermine the culture and values of this country. There are many issues between Trump and Hillary that you're a Grand Canyon apart. We're going to be the party of law enforcement and safety in the streets. They're not. So it's going to be a lot of issues that I believe. Look, I don't know what the final vote tally will be, but I think Donald Trump has a really good chance to win. I mean, he'll win Texas, and we want him to win big. But I think Donald Trump is in a really good position to win. It's early still, but to be tied with her at this point, she's outspending him 25-1. And he's tied in the polls. That's a very good sign this early.
You are leading the Texas delegation this week, spoke to them at the breakfast this morning, and one of the things you were talking about was just not having the full version of the town hall with President Obama on race relations editing. What was going on there?
Well, I was the only elected official in the country invited to the town hall with ABC with the president last week, and they won't release the full tape. Today, we were able to get the full transcript after I spoke this morning, and we're going to be releasing that. I believe the Austin American-Statesman may already have a copy up. they edited out 61% of what I said and only 20% of what the president said. And the key point that they edited out to me, and there were lots of key points, obviously, was I was sitting next to Cameron Sterling, whose father was killed in Louisiana. He's 15 years old. And the president was an hour late, so I got to know him and his mom and struck up a friendship. And I said to Cameron, I said, when I asked my questions of the president, at the end, if I asked you to stand, would you stand with me? It'd really be powerful, Cameron, if we stood together. And so as I asked the last question to the president, I said, Mr. President, I'd like for Cameron to stand up. He's agreed to. And so Cameron and I stood there, a 15-year-old African-American young man who said, I don't want good police killed and I don't want people in my community killed. And this 60-year-old Republican stood up. That's coming together. And we said, Mr. President, will you stop the violence? We're coming to this from two different perspectives. This is what that town hall was supposed to be about. And they cut that out from the tape. They will not release the tape, and we're going to continue to press that issue with ABC.
Some of the issues, that you've been at the forefront of, just with regards to, I know that you've walked back some of the comments that you made on Fox News.
Just one word.
Yeah, with regards to that. Also, in the bathroom issue and some new stuff coming out today with the Fort Worth ISD.
The Fort Worth Independent School District, you'll recall the superintendent there unilaterally, without any input from parents or taxpayers, without a school board vote, put in a policy that would have had boys and girls showering together, boys and girls using the same bathroom. In fact, would not even allow the school districts to call boys boys and girls girls, call them students and scholars. And because there was no local control only happens when people have a say and can go to the school board and have a say in the school board vote. So we pressed that. I asked for a legal opinion from our Attorney General, Ken Paxton. He agreed they had broken the law, because I knew immediately they had broken the law, in my view, because every parent has a right to know what happens to their kids in school, and under their policy, if the student didn't want the parent to know, the school wouldn't tell them. And so today the school district pulled down their policy, and I'm glad that the superintendent and the school board listened to the people, because they eventually did come out and speak out against it almost 9-1.
They said they didn't pull down the policy. They made some of the changes, and that they had always intended to include the parents in this, and are saying that maybe some of the words that are being said are being misconstrued a little bit.
I'm being respectful to them. They need to be respectful back to the Attorney General, the Lieutenant Governor, and most importantly, the parents in that district. They have pulled back his policy. And I'll just leave it at that. I haven't heard their comments. We're being respectful. We appreciate them pulling down the policy and basically saying this will be decided on a school-by-school basis, which it's always been. That's the way all the schools handle it. And that parents would be informed if there was anything happening. So I'm disappointed to hear that from you. It's the first I've heard that now they're saying, well, we really didn't pull it down. It's disappointing. But we have a victory there.
Maybe not pulling it down, but just in terms of kind of rewording some of the things and moving ahead with that.
There aren't going to be any boys and girls showering together in every school in Fort Worth Independent School District. There aren't going to be boys and girls going to the bathroom together, and there aren't going to be parents left in the dark. Again, they will handle that on a case-by-case basis, but we've never had a problem. I think they have 6 transgender students out of 86,000. This has never been an issue. Never been an issue in Texas or any other school. So we're going to stay on top of it.
Let's move into the convention. Yeah. Donald Trump, Ted Cruz. What are you expecting from the senator tonight? Nice event. I know you were at the event this afternoon.
Yes.
This is the most important election.
Ted Cruz being here speaks volumes of his class as an individual and his character. And Donald Trump inviting him to be here speaks volumes about his character and his class, because most politicians I know in Trump's position would have said to Ted, if you want to speak, you've got to endorse me. Donald Trump did not ask Ted to endorse him. He just said, and Trump told me this, he said, Ted Cruz is a fine young man, he's got a bright future, really smart, worked hard, and he did very well. I'd like to have him speak. And so that was magnanimous. And then let's look at Ted. I won't mention the other presidential candidates who aren't here. But look, the governor of Ohio is not here. It's disgraceful. I mean, they all took the pledge in this building that they would support the winner. But Ted is here. It was a tough loss for him. He worked so hard. He did so well. But he's here, and no matter what he says, the fact that he's here and the fact that Trump invited him without any quid pro quo says a lot about both of them, and that's a positive thing.
Do you think he backs Donald Trump tonight, officially endorses him?
He won't be voting for Hillary Clinton. I mean, he didn't tell me that, but I think I can pretty much, you can put that in the bank.
What do you think it is about just
about a minute or two left?
Trying to push for Republicans to get behind Trump? Because I know that we've seen a lot this week, even with the Texas delegation and the floor fight the first night.
I would say that 80% of the people on this floor are now with Trump. Whether he was their first choice or last choice, he's their choice now. And I really do believe about 80% of the people on the floor. You saw the cheers in the Texas delegation last night when I did the roll call. I think 75 to 85%, maybe higher, of our delegates most of them were with Cruz, but they're on board. Look, I was chair of the Cruz campaign in Texas. I traveled with him. I raised money for him. I worked hard for him. As soon as Trump got the delegates, I contacted them and said, I'm on board. We have to beat Hillary. I'm on board. I wish it were Ted getting, not tonight speaking, but tomorrow night as the nominee. But Trump won, and we have to back the winner. I would expect if Ted had won, for the Trump people to support him. So we'll be fine. And I believe by November that it's usually expected to get to win a race. The Republican has to get about 90% plus of the Republican vote. Trump will be there. I'm going to have to run. I hate to leave you.
We're out of time anyway. So Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, we appreciate you being with us. Republican analyst Ted DeLisi joins us right after this break. Welcome back to Capitol Tonight. Republican analyst Ted DeLisi and now. And Ted, first of all, crowd's going wild back here. Yeah. Laura Ingram speaking, but just some big news out of Texas today with the state's voter ID law, and your take on this and kind of where things go from here, especially when it comes to this November's election.
So I don't know what it means for this November's election right now, but what I know is the Texas voter ID law was deemed unconstitutional by the Fifth Circuit. And that's a little bit of a rarity because we saw recently the Indiana voter ID law was deemed constitutional by the Supreme Court. So the real question here is that Indiana allows for several forms of photo ID. Texas only allows for 6 forms of photo ID if you're going to vote. And I think what the Fifth Circuit said is that Texas's only 6 points or 6 versions is too tight. And what I'm expecting is the Texas legislature to come to town in January to change it to mirror the Indiana law and then to send it back up for judicial scrutiny.
Do you see this being, a big issue at the ballot box? And
coming on the heels of HB 2 being declared unconstitutional, as we saw a couple of weeks ago, this is now 2 high-profile pieces of legislation that haven't met constitutional muster in the courts. I don't know exactly what the future of this will be from the Fifth Circuit. I was surprised. The Fifth Circuit is known as a more conservative court, so I was a little bit surprised by it. But I think that there is a path to mirror the Indiana law that would make most members of the Texas legislature happy.
Let's talk Ted Cruz. Yeah. Speech happening tonight. Obviously spoke to that group of supporters earlier today that we've been talking a little bit about. What are you expecting from him tonight?
I'll tell you what, I think it's a real pivotal moment for Ted Cruz tonight as he's got to figure out how close he wants to get to Donald Trump. A lot of hard feelings from late in the primary cycle, a lot of barbs back and forth, but if he is going to make an affirmative statement about Trump, he has to do it tonight. I think he's played a little. He's set the expectations game really, really, really low. I think he'll be more complimentary of Trump than people think.
Do you think that he does the official endorsement? I know we've asked it kind of every night.
I don't know what official endorsement means. We saw Mitch McConnell kind of lay out the case for Trump. Here are the things Trump will sign. Here are the things Hillary will veto. I wouldn't be surprised if he lays out the policy case and leaves it at that. Jeff Rowe, the campaign manager for Ted Cruz, did say that Trump will be pleased with the speech. I'm hard-pressed to think that Trump will be pleased with the speech that doesn't mention Trump by name and say affirmatively that Cruz backs him.
We saw at that event earlier today, just some kind of funny moments, but also personal moments for Cruz, thanking his supporters. Sure. And he kind of made a comment about, I just didn't want to break down in front of you after the Indiana primary and become not lying Ted, but crying Ted. And then we saw the Trump plane flying over. The minute he said the Republican nominee and the crowd booed. And Do you think that he's a little more relaxed going into tonight?
I think, there's been some time, in the heat of the battle, it's hard to have perspective. This is a moment, he's 45 years old. He ran a good campaign for president. He gets his moment in the sun. But this convention is about Trump. The other big speech tonight will be Pence. And, in some ways, I hate to say it, you ran a good campaign, but you're not the nominee, and we're on to the general election.
What are you expecting from Mike Pence tonight?
I'll tell you what, I think Pence is kind of an open book tonight. I think voters and this hall need to hear, a lot of people just don't know about him. Indiana, he's been a successful governor. He was a member of Congress. But this is a chance to kind of fill in the gaps of who he is personally and to see what kind of surrogate he will be. Can he take the fight to the Democrats in the fall?
I think a big question, too, is just should Cruz be nervous about Mike Pence? And we hear so much about 2020 and just them. I mean, they're both going to get this national stage tonight and kind of making their cases to the country. But should there be a worry there?
It's a really interesting, I think a lot of this convention, maybe too much of it, has been about what-if scenarios 4 or 6 years from now. I really haven't I've tried to stay away from that a little bit, but there's no doubt in my mind that if the goal is to kind of who is the voice going to be of a conservative movement. Remember, 4 years ago, Paul Ryan was elevated on this stage, and then he became Speaker of the House. So being part of a national ticket is a huge bonus for whatever you want to do in the future.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch. I know that we're going to be here carrying it live and trying to do some analysis, and we'll get the reaction right after that. And then, of course, again at the 11 o'clock show, but that is going to do it for us. For this time, at least, the 7 o'clock hour here in Cleveland, Ohio. Again, we'll be taking Texas Senator Ted Cruz's speech live a little later in the night, and we will be back with more at 11 o'clock. For now, good night.